right, thank you for staying with the State of the Nation. We talk about matters, politics, and everything in between there. Keep your views coming. We'll sample some of them in just a bit. At Trevor Mbidi at Citizen TV Kenya, use the hashtag Daybreak. Honorable Dan Manzo is still here with me. Senator for Makueni, Honorable Kuria Kimani, Member of Parliament for Molo, is here. And Erima Wako, Executive Director for Siasa Place. Asante sana for staying. Now, Honorable Kuria, we're talking about this issue around maandamano. Should it then be regulated? Because I see the Mbere North Member of Parliament, Ruku, tried to bring in that bill. But like Manzo is saying, there's already an existing bill. Should there be parameters under which this can operate? Because what Manzo is saying also can still come up. It was not our people, but destruction of property still continues.
Before we go to Honorable Ruku's bill, I must congratulate the Honorable Dan Manzo, because today he said things that we have been with him in this show that I had never heard him admit. One of them, that they actually know who the protesters are, and two, they know what they wanted from the beginning. Because he has said that had President Ruto agreed to the issue of composition of the commissioners, then we would not have got here. Which begs what you've been saying all along. It has not been the issue about cost of living. It has nothing to do with Kenyans. It's about the selfish interest of the Azimio leadership. It is people who are looking for jobs. It is the jobs of the IEBC commissioners. Which begs the question, why do we have to take people to the street? Why did you have to have people killed? Why did we do the destruction of property? How did we get to all the disgrace you've got as a country to the international market, to the international community, just to get a few people jobs? If what they're saying is true, it was bipartisan. What you rightfully said is true. I would be happy if a member of my team is negotiating on my behalf from the other side. It's an advantage to me. And that's why the issue of Aden Kinan should have been a win for Azimio. Because if it's bipartisan, and I have one of, if you're going to Russia and you have one of the people negotiating on the other side, then I would be happier, because then they will take care of our interests. But clearly, it wasn't about interest of Kenyans. It wasn't about the cost of living. It is just about the composition of IEBC. It's about the next election. It's about who do we give this job. And it's really sad that we had to take this country through all this for us to get here. You asked a very valid question. Should then maandamanos be regulated? Yes. In as much as I agree, the drafters of a constitution saw an avenue of, if I feel disgruntled by a particular policy, by a particular decision by the government, and I have no place to air my views, then I can picket. It means I can go do a placard, walk around the streets and say, guys, these are my rights and this is what I want done. But the thinking behind it is that you have explored all the legal avenues you can get to have your issue resolved, and therefore the only thing you have left is to go to the street. And that would have been very unlikely. And even the ones that, and you can see protests that have actually been successful in terms of there was no chaos or no destruction of property. We have seen teachers protest. We've actually seen teachers even go for a strike for more than a year, for more than a year. No property was destroyed, nobody died. It was peaceful. We've seen our medical doctors and nursing protesting against whether it is delayed salaries, whether it is their terms and conditions of service. We saw Kenya Airways employees protest against the conditions of their workplace. Because if they try to negotiate with their employer, for example, in the issue of doctors and nurses, or the pilots, or the teachers, and the employer is not listening, then they are left with no option than to picket on the street. But when you have members of parliament elected into premium positions, there are only 349 members of parliament in the Republic of Kenya. Out of 50 million Kenyans, we only have 359 who has the privilege of speaking something that goes to the Hansard, that if they make a piece of legislation, if they make a particular regulation, it's going to be law.
Okay.
So when you see them leading process in the city, it's a mockery to the Constitution. It is a mockery to the premium positions that is bestowed on these particular people.
Okay.
And it's quite unfortunate that they are the ones who constantly use that, because when they have a following and they have money to make sure, because Trevor, let me tell you for a fact, there are very few people in this country who will go on the street the whole day without getting a pay, because you cannot eat maandamano. These men and women, when they go back home, they have to feed their children. Wako here told us very well the analogy of we are really producing, the number of kids are increasing. And if it's true for that sample of population, it means that in every homestead, almost in every homestead, there's a newborn. So that newborn cannot eat maandamano. You'll have to go with milk and bread in the evening. So suddenly, these protesters are going home with bread. So they're going home with the bread because it is being given by the likes of Bodan Manzo here. That's why he's saying he knows his protesters. Yeah. Because now that he knows them, he is able to sort them at the end of maandamano. So even when we expect that the thinking behind maandamano should be for those people who have left with no option than to go to the streets.
Okay.
But the people leading the protests are people with premium positions in this republic to make the budget of this country.
Okay.
We are now going to discuss the finance bill once we go back to the floor, to the House after the recess. We are going to do the budget of the Republic of Kenya. We are going to discuss the appropriations bill. We are going to discuss the estimates. So if, Trevor, you are there deciding how much goes to education, how much goes to defense, how much goes to agriculture, how much goes to health, how do you convince us that you're on the streets?
Okay.
For what reason? Just for selfish gains, unfortunately.
Manzo, should protests be regulated further?
Yes, I think protests should be regulated further. What is lucky now is the regulations under the Public Order Act. Public Order Act is a very old act. It's a colonial act, which was used to suppress the Mau Mau and then protest those days. And that's the act we still have. It should be amended to rhyme with the Constitution. But the regulations usually state what happens. Like all protests are allowed. And this happens all over the world. I don't know why Kenya wants to be unique. And then there's something called proclamation. The moment a protest becomes rough or begins to destroy, then there must be an announcement, a proclamation that the protest is called off, and the people are given like 15 minutes to clear. If they don't clear, and this must be announced loud and clear, if they don't clear, then whatever happens that after that, then even the government cannot take responsibility. But for now, for the deaths which have occurred and for any injuries and any damages, you can actually sue the government of Kenya and get compensated. When it comes to, the protests we are having, it's not just about electoral justice, but electoral justice is key, because you cannot be ruled fraudulently or by people who have stolen elections. That's a very big fraud. And therefore, that's where big problems of a country begin. That's when we have misrule, then you are going to have, a poor performing economy. And that's why there's no food in the country. That's why there are no jobs. And the Kenyans have been very patient. Kenyans are so patient with the current government because they were promised so much in 100 days. Now it is many months, and none of those promises have been kept, and most probably they are not going to be kept for the next 5 years. So I want to read politics in it and say that you cannot really divorce politics from this. Yeah. Of course, the food on the table is key. The jobs, opportunities, and the fairness in the country, among many other things we requested. But for me, if you don't have electoral justice, then you are not going to have peace at all. No. And that's how revolution comes. It means we have so many Kenyans, and really I want to plead with the youth. You know, the youth are 72%. A lot of them are registered as voters, but on the deciding day, they don't decide. They let the old and the elderly go vote, and then they either sleep or they go take local brews.
Yeah.
I really want to encourage the youth, even those who have turned 18, you know, register as a Kenyan, get your ID, and then very soon we're going to have a voter registration.
Yeah.
Register, and then when you register as a voter, go and make that decision, because that's what determines the government formed. The government of the people then will serve the people. But when you have a fraudulent government in power, then how will you convince any Kenyan who knows that there is something wrong? How will they trust you? When you have numbers in the House which have been bought, Parliament now has just become a rubber stamp of the executive. It's a waste of time to go and sit and debate there. It's a useless debate. And therefore, because once, even if you debate, the answer is known. There is going to be voting, which is not fair, where people are going to be whipped, you know, members of parliament who are elected in the opposition have been bought. In fact, as soon as the election was over, there were more members of parliament from the opposition than from government. But the political parties were, just like the case in America now, the Republicans are more than, you know, the Democrats. But we have not seen President Joe Biden going to buy members of the Republicans so that he can stabilize his government.
Yeah.
He is able to manage the opposition when it is majority.
You keep referring to being ruled fraudulently. So what is the best case scenario when it comes to electoral justice? The president has been sworn in, you went to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court upheld his election. What is the best case scenario from there?
The best case scenario is, first of all, in the constitution of an electoral commission, it must reflect the country. It must reflect all the stakeholders. And the best model in the world, even in the US and in the Commonwealth, the commissioners come from political parties, just like the way the wisdom of President Moi in 1997. There was the IPPG, political parties. So if you have it, but what has happened is the leader of majority, Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah, came up with an amendment which even disorganized that formulation more. And now you can only have one person appointing the electoral commission, the president. Whether you like it or not, parliament is a rubber stamp, and is the one who is going to appoint the next electoral commission. And we are saying, unless this is done, then it's looking for a devolution. There's no way you will rule people by force, even using the police. What I really want to tell the state is that the people can defeat the police. And that's what causes troubles in African countries. So we need to sit down, do the bipartisan, and the bipartisan must be honest. It should not end up into another rubber stamp, because Kenyans will not accept that.
Which is my next conversation, because should it be intra-parliamentary or extra-parliamentary? Because then that is a conversation that may even lead to protests again. So once they agree, should that agreement simply be ratified by Parliament, or should it be brought back to the people, the parliamentarians, to debate it again?
First and foremost, there must be an amendment of that bill, and sometimes parties, the opposition and the government agrees on a law. There must be an amendment of that law which was signed recently by President Ruto, that for you to amend that law, either the political parties will agree, and there will also be public participation. So if you really want to be bipartisan, bipartisan means involve the people, involve stakeholders. The Constitution talks of public participation. Public participation can begin before or can be in the course. You know, this team can also agree on that law and then send it to the people. At one point or another, it must go to the people. So whether you are using parliament or not, the Constitution demands that it must go to the people.
Okay.
And I think it's so easy. If you give it to the people, they'll give you the best, and you'll have all the ideas, and when it comes to the House, they'll be voting.
All right.
But the voting should also not be fraudulent. Okay. If it turns out to be a rubber stamp issue, then I don't see the reason why any Kenyan should not be allowed to demand. Okay. And I think the use of police brutality is not a permanent solution. It's a criminal act done by the state, orchestrated by the state, which should be conducting prosecutions. Okay. And what the current government should know is government don't stay forever. Crime stay forever. Whoever is committing a crime because they're in power now, they will still be answerable tomorrow when they are no longer in power. And I can assure you, you can never defeat the people. All
right. And Nerima, as we wind up on this conversation, should it be intra-parliamentary or extra-parliamentary? How would you rather see these talks structured from the team or the bipartisan talks?
I think it should be extra. I believe that the public does need to be involved, the various stakeholders. But even when we talk about IPPG and the involvement of political parties have changed. Now we have almost 100, I believe, the registrar of political parties can confirm. But there are over 85 political parties. Because of that, we will now be stuck in the debate of the criteria of the political parties, and then it will go back to majority political parties, and we all understand how political parties work in Kenya. They are owned by individuals, not necessarily based on ideology. And also when we look at the membership of political parties, there is no clear sense of, yes, there are some members who pay to be part of the party, but there's no that involvement. Political parties are mainly vehicles, and we see them uprising before an election. Right now, most of our political parties are dead, especially the smaller ones, because they cannot maintain to remain open. How are they going to be able to fund to have offices in half of the counties in the country and have people manning those offices? It means you need the resources to keep them running. And we also understand that the culture in the country, we don't have a culture of volunteerism, especially amongst the youth. The government has an entire program to encourage the youth to volunteer and to participate and to engage. So I do agree that it needs to involve various stakeholders, but I believe the stakeholders involved are going to change. Yeah. At the moment, we are having a huge debate in regards to regulating religious institutions because of the cases that we've seen with cults. Churches had a higher stance or a higher regard in the 90s. Right now, I do not believe they have the same respect, especially amongst the youth. As much as the following is still large, the engagement has been very political. We can see a statement being made, and we'll see a fraction of the church following Kenya Kwanza, a fraction of the church following Azimio. Gone are the days where the church had its own stance, and the stance was the people. So even when we look at how the public is mobilized, this is one of the first times where we're seeing them being politically led. So, you know, when we talk about regulating protests or demonstrations, it's also about who is leading those particular protests and demonstrations. When you have politicians at the fore, for many of the changes that we have seen constitutionally, and even there was the example from Honorable Kimani where he talked about nurses or even teachers, it's not a political leader at the forefront. It is an individual fighting for their basic right. And I think that shift has brought us to now this conversation, where when you have politicians involved at the fore, now decisions are becoming very political, rather than looking at, when we think of freedom of expression, demonstrations are expressions. So when you are regulating an expression, to what extent? So there are countries who have regulated, yes, and I believe public order is important. But when we begin to talk about the state and the church, for instance, there are some countries you cannot campaign in a church. You cannot. You cannot raise and start talking about political issues in a church. You are not allowed to. It's against the law. And one of those countries is Namibia. But here in Kenya, it is very much permitted, even though in some occasions you're entering private ceremonies, a burial, and you want to talk about national issues and people are mourning and trying to bury a relative. So I think it's not just about public order and regulating demonstrations. I think that the public has changed. And I think that the dynamics of the public have changed. And I think that there are particular behaviors that fall in line with expression that do need to be regulated, not just in the aspect of riots, demonstrations, and freedom of expression, but also how our politicians engage the public.
Okay. Honorable Kuria, how should this conversation by the bipartisan team be taken in? Should it then go back to parliamentarians to debate it again, or should it come from them straight to the people and ratified by Parliament?
Trevor, Parliament is composed of representatives of the people. And if all the political players would take advantage of the premium position of Parliament, then this discussion would adequately be dealt with in Parliament. Because if you look at even the composition, what Honorable Senator here was talking about, which are the majority, which are the minority, there are very many people who feel disgruntled across the political divide on particular decisions. Because remember, even when we come to Parliament by the strength of our political parties, if, for example, I'm appointed, so I'm elected into Parliament through UDA, but bottom line, I am elected to represent the people of Molo. So where there is a conflict between my political party's position and my people's position that elected me to Parliament, I will take my people's position. Because I am, first of all, a Molo resident, then a UDA member. So my loyalty is more to my people than to my political party. And so when there is a position or a decision that I feel will disadvantage my people, I will take my people's position on the party position. And if Azimio, our Azimio brothers and sisters would take that and persuade people across the political divide to issues and policies that affect the people, then they would get support across the political divide. And you've seen this happen. In 2018 or 19, when there was a proposed increase of VAT on fuel to, I think, 16%, we saw a very divided approach to that matter in Parliament. We had people, both in ruling party and opposition, united that we do not want this increase in VAT on fuel, because they were persuaded, not intimidated. But when you have a coalition that wants to lead the people, quote unquote, like cows, and not allow room for negotiation or discussion, and where if you are disgruntled, then you are ejected out. And case in point is what is happening to our Jubilee brothers and sisters. They really went out of the way. They sacrificed their all. If you look at someone like Honorable Sabina Chege, if I'll use an example, she really went out of her way, losing her political seat, losing her popularity in the region. You saw in one of the functions she publicly cried when she tried to persuade her people to support this political formation, and the people, absolutely rejected her. She cried genuinely because she believed in a cause of Azimio cause. But when she came, and then because now they think that I don't know what happened between them, then the issue is now to kick her out of that position, and everyone that has disagreed with Azimio, the decision has to kick them out from their position, to kick them out from their committees, because even if you remember, even a little earlier, even the ones that disagreed were being kicked out of committees. Then they are using intimidation instead of persuasion. Yeah. So when you intimidate legally elected individuals to Parliament, you are not going to succeed. On the issue of composition of IEBC, I would like to just a minute weigh in on this particular matter. You know what Azimio want? They want Raila to appoint the commissioners, plain and simple. But you have a law. And this law actually was passed in Parliament. And if I remember, the sponsor of this bill, the IEBC bill, at the tail end of last Parliament, was the leader of majority then, the Honorable Amos Kimunya. And that's how we ended up with the Cherera 4, which was approved. So if you are in a position of influence and you're able to appoint people that you like into the commission, then it is okay. But the same law now, when you're on the other side, you do not want the law to apply to you. You want now to change how it's done, because you won't think, and a country cannot be run like that. A country is not a personal property of anybody. So if I make a law today, then I must agree that the law will apply to me even tomorrow when I'm not the appointing authority. Who are the composition of the selection panel for IEBC? We're talking about a representative from the Parliamentary Service Commission. Who are the members of Parliamentary Service Commission? They are people the commissioners appointed across the political divide. We have our Azimio people in Parliamentary Service Commission. We have the political parties liaison committee, which is supposed to give 1 member. We have the Law Society of Kenya, which is supposed to give 2 people, a man and a woman. Who forms the Law Society of Kenya? In fact, you've seen, including even the current case in court, on the legality of appointment of cabinet administrative secretaries being sponsored by Law Society of Kenya. So technically, we could say that Law Society of Kenya is, if I would use a political word, is more affiliated to Azimio than it would on government. And usually the Law Society of Kenya usually gets to be more, if you look at it politically, more of opposition than in government. So, they have two people
against the government policies now. Yes. They're
no, I'm just saying, I say politically, quote unquote politically. I'm not talking about the legality of it. It's a decision I really respect. But usually they will take decisions that are not popular with government. They are supposed to nominate two people. The intra-religious council is supposed to appoint two people. Then once this panel decides who are going to be selected to be commissioners, this panel has to carry interviews publicly. What does publicly mean? That if you and I have any issue with any of those commissioners, I can go and present my petition in that public hearing. And if, for example, I have evidence, and remember, even this public hearing receive a lot of media coverage, receive a lot of publicity, and if I am able to demonstrate that this particular commissioner cannot be independent because they are conflicted, certainly the public will judge even, and that person cannot be appointed as commissioner. But these people don't want that. They want only commissioners that they themselves appoint as individuals. You cannot run a country like that.
All right.
A country is not a personal property of anybody in this country.
Manzi, I'll give you a right to respond to that before you take feedback and then get into the different conversation. Does the Azimio team want an seemingly allied IBC to them? Because that's what Kimani Kure is saying.
Well, I don't think so. What we want is fairness. And that law was recently amended by Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah, the current leader of majority. When it came to Senate, the JLAC committee had its own reservations. But at the very final minute, the leader of majority in Senate said, we have instructions from the party, and that's how we are going to vote. And bearing in mind that there is a majority UDA affiliate, of course, we lost the motion despite a very heavy debate. And therefore, that's how the matter must then spill back to the people. What do the people of Kenya want? Do they want the current format, or do they want to join the rest of the world on using, political interests are represented through political parties, and we have a political parties law. So it's better when we send it back to the people so that we can come up with a referee of elections we can all agree. But the moment the referee is one-sided, then there is only one recipe. You are looking for chaos. You cannot rule, by force. You can only rule because the sovereign power belongs to the people. And let's keep on going back to the people. But those who are ruling us, fraudulently, then you cannot use force on us. And I can assure you, finally the people will win, because the Constitution gives all sovereign power to the people, which they can donate to the elected leaders, to the judiciary, and to any other arm of authority. It's the power of the people, it's not their own power. So it's not also our own power. Yeah. We just want the people to exercise their constitutional right of their own sovereignty. And through that, they can choose a right to referee to conduct the next elections.
All right, let's bring up some of the feedback and then talk about this office of the leader of opposition. It's also been quite an issue there, and also why plan to block Uhuru's pension is a tall order. Let's bring up what you're saying on this conversation around the protest at Trevor Mbidi at Citizen TV Kenya. Is the hashtag Daybreak. Engineer Lazaro says urgent committee should be formed to enact law governing VIP security. Even police themselves aren't happy with the way they are being inconvenienced whenever a leader isn't in good terms with the government. There must be structure. Okay. Godi Baraza says the back and forth between Kenya Kwanza and Azimio la Umoja regarding the bipartisan talks is time wasting. Both sides should show commitment and seriousness for the sake of peace and stability that will power up the nation. Okay? Atanas Mavuti says these politicians are not fighting for ordinary Kenyans. They are fighting for themselves. Discussions on how to lower cost of living is not done through street protest, but a sober discussion involving strategies, formulation, and implementation. Honorable Lillian says the biggest problem we have in Kenya is that we tend with the trending. Then we immediately forget the previous issues we were so angry about. Then we completely forget them thereafter. We only remember them when such things happen. Okay? Nick says, even though every person has the right peacefully and unarmed in capital to protest, why are stones, which when pelted cause a lot of damage, not regarded as weapons? Stones are now being purchased beforehand. It's sad. J.M. Musoma says, Azimio should also demand ethnic balance in government. A recent report indicates that the president's NDP's communities are overrepresented in public service. That is evident in Ruto's appointments, where his tribesmen dominate. So sad. Okay. Nerima, there's been a proposal